Hi everyone, it's Dr. RAMANI. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism. And I have good news. I have a new podcast out I'd love for you to listen to. It's called Navigating Narcissism. You can listen to it anywhere you listen to your podcast. Please subscribe to it, and I really hope you enjoy it. Information on it is in the video notes. Very different than this YouTube channel, a real chance to sort of talk to really interesting kind of real world survivor stories. So please listen to that too. Well, let's go back to this because here's a question for today. What's more challenging? A relationship with a narcissistic person or with a psychopathic person? Drop your answers in the comments. I'm real curious to hear what you have to say. So, some of you may have been in both of these, some only in one. But if you've been through both, you really are going to have the answer. But I'll get to that answer. But let's just sort of start with the basics on narcissistic relationships and psychopathic relationships. Both are pretty awful. So we're really talking about gradations of terrible, difficult, and painful. There's really no good version of these. Both kinds of relationships are messed up. Both sets of relationships are relationships characterized by manipulation, devaluation, confusion, contempt, gaslighting, isolation, fear, grief, all bad things. The only way I can say it is the psychopathic relationships are so treacherous, so devious, so terrifying that you start to feel like you're living in like a Lifetime movie, and not in a good way. Once everything that happens in the relationship all comes to light, these relationships are so perverse that a person in the relationship really does feel like they have been in something otherworldly. Psychopathic relationships can be characterized by sort of grifting behavior, parasitic behavior, or running a real sort of financial hustle on you. And they tell big ass lies, like big lies. For example, they'll lie about having ever been married before, or having other kids, or they lie about the job they have, or having a job, or how much they make, or where they are from, or how they spend their time. They may have been using false identities, aliases, and even have criminal histories you aren't aware of. Psychopathic individuals are really, really, really good at lying. Way better than narcissists are at lying. The shame makes the narcissist a little twitchy when they try to lie. The psychopathic folks are so cold, so calculating, so cunning, that they would sell your grandmother's wedding ring for bail money while your grandmother is still alive. It's scary, and the social costs of psychopathy are actually quite high in terms of criminality and recidivism and all of it. Once you share your story about the relationship, you might get a lot of, oh, wows, and people will see it and even get it because it's so chilling. Like I said, it almost feels like a movie. And you may feel like you've been through the ringer and terrorized, stunned by how you got played. But ultimately, it all slowly adds up. And many survivors of psychopathic relationships are angry at themselves because they feel foolish for sort of being played. And you are not foolish. You were played by a professional deceiver. It's just what they do. All of us would be vulnerable. Now, the narcissistic relationship, in contrast to the psychopathic relationship, is actually a bit more complicated. Narcissists in some ways are kind of like psychopath wannabes because they can't quite get the lying down right, and all that insecurity and the shame and the anxiety stop them. For the narcissist, the grandiosity is a defense. For the psychopath, they kind of believe their own hype, so it's a more consistent grandiosity. And it's basically a don't mess with me or I'll crush you kind of grandiosity. The narcissists sort of say a line like that, like I'll crush you, and they're sort of the equivalent of a little kid putting on a villain costume. For the psychopath, they will crush you, and the villain costume is actually their real clothes. Now, with the psychopathic individuals, the charm and the charisma are even more shallow than it is for the narcissists, if you can believe that. For psychopaths, the charm and charisma are just a way of getting their grift and their shakedown on, a way to get a foot into the door. For the narcissistic person, the charm and charisma are once again a way for them to cover up their insecurities and to get validation and attention, which they desperately need. Psychopaths aren't really looking for validation. They really don't care what any of us think of them. They want power, dominance, and complete control. Narcissistic people want those things too, but in the service of their own sort of sense of kind of almost a powerlessness or a striving to be something more. The psychopaths don't have that neurotic underbelly. So that's going to make these very different kinds of relationships. So when you're in a relationship with a narcissistic person, there are some normal days, sometimes even normal weeks or months. The narcissistic person may actually even be a decent parent at times. They might be a little sweet, warm, friendly. With the psychopath, maybe for a minute. But there's a real discomfort that psychopathic people have at these warm types of interacting. And in terms of the parenting, if they have children, and many psychopaths do have children, it may be more of a power grab, a way to, I don't know, assert masculinity or some other culturally valued quality, a way to build a legacy or a dynasty. It's in sort of in essence, they're sort of breeding their own soldiers to take over their stuff because they don't trust anybody else. Having children may be a way for them to isolate someone. It may be unintended, and in unintended cases, they'll probably abandon the mother and the child. Some narcissistic people actually do welcome parenthood, though they definitely don't have the patience for it. They may like the validation they get from a worshiping little child. They may like the identity or the sort of social status they get from it. But many of you out there co-parenting with narcissistic people will begrudgingly note that, yeah, sometimes your kids do have fun with their other parent, even if the discipline and food choices aren't on point. The psychopath will not be a Disneyland parent. They can't be bothered. Lots of narcissists can be really good Disneyland parents. Psychopaths start to become interested in their children, if they have them, when they are useful to them. So that starts around late adolescence and early adulthood. So that's where psychopaths may actually waft back into their children's lives at that point. So the confusion in the narcissistic relationship comes from the mashup of the good days and the bad days. The vacillating between the stuff that works and the stuff that hurts. There's a greater long-term likelihood of getting stuck into a cycle of self-blame with a narcissistic person because of the good days, and that trauma-bonded back and forth between good and bad. In a psychopathic relationship, it becomes a day-over-day sense of fear, of menace, of perhaps seeing this person function really well at work or in politics or other public arenas, but really other than for the first minute of the relationship. They may then go on to become rather cold and clipped in any of their interpersonal relationships. And the only kind of node of connection people may have in an intimate relationship with a psychopath is sex, which can be quite dominating, cold, degrading, or disconnected from emotion. Psychopathic relationships are unsettling and they're scary. Some people will say it feels as though I was living with a cold stranger with a sort of confusing backstory and the stories didn't always track. And some people say, I actually was scared to go digging any deeper. People will sometimes say that the thing that attracted them to a psychopathic person wasn't just the superficial charm, but their take-chargeness, the sense that the psychopathic person knew exactly what they want, and even the sense of power that they inhabited and possessed. Narcissistic relationships, in contrast, are heartbreaking and disappointing, hopes up and hopes down. It's a different kind of pain in the narcissistic versus the psychopathic relationship. In both cases, you're manipulated, gaslighted, and confused. Narcissistic relationships get really bad when the narcissistic person is triggered, whether by shame or failure or disappointment. Psychopathic relationships get bad when they are questioned in any way. Psychopathic people do not like being questioned, and when their false self, which they've so carefully curated, is taken apart, they don't like anything or any line of questioning that shows the cracks in it. It's less about failure for them than being questioned, and at that point, you might see their impulsive, even dangerous rage. Sadly, where the road meets on the two of these personality styles are the malignant narcissists, the cold, callous, hostile, impulsive, malevolent, just slightly insecure folks. These relationships are still more cold than not. Very few of the good days and lots of fear, control, and menace, but not as much of that cool confidence that we tend to see in a psychopathic person. When it comes to danger and risk, the psychopathic relationships are definitely worse. There's a greater likelihood of menace, threat, and violence, and the lack of remorse means that they simply eradicate someone who may get in the way of their power grab and their well-honed facade. The impulsivity we see in narcissism means that there could be a quick, snappy rage in response to something they don't like. Narcissistic people, as we know, we definitely do see aggression and violence in these relationships. Maybe a little less calculated and cold. You might be able to clearly witness the escalation. With the narcissistic relationships, the day-to-day will be a messy, unsatisfying roller coaster. With malignant narcissists, there may be more likelihood of harm, danger, and physical and financial risk. But otherwise, it's just a mess. And there's still going to be fear, but maybe not as much as we might see in a psychopathic relationship. I know many people have some confusion. They might say, what kind of relationship am I in? Is this person psychopathic? Are they narcissistic? Psychopathy is much, much more rare. I hope this video clarifies a little of this on the basis of the kinds of challenges and experiences you've had in the relationship. And the final piece is, what about when it's time to get out? Clearly, a psychopathic relationship may often represent more danger. Again, that lack of remorse and the calculatedness and the likelihood and the history of impulsivity and high-risk behavior. A safety plan is often essential, and working with a domestic violence program may be necessary. We'll have those resources in the video notes. These are people who don't like losing power, being out of control. And even if they're not violent, it may get horribly punitive around divorce, custody, finances, and a sense of menace always hanging out there. A lifetime spent looking over your shoulder, and a greater likelihood of post-separation abuse. With narcissistic relationships, it can be all over the map. If you're the one leaving, it'll never go smoothly because they don't like abandonment, they don't like losing. With the malignant narcissistic folks, we may see more of the higher risk situations. With the other types of narcissism, it's more flying monkey, smear campaign, victimized rants on social media kind of stuff. The divorces are still messy as hell. Ego injury makes them vindictive. And while both psychopathic and narcissistic individuals are vindictive and impulsively vindictive, that pattern could end up manifesting as slightly more dangerous in a psychopathic individual. Relationally, I do think that while there's a lot of overlap, there's a real difference between the two relationships, and both are awful. And it's really not fair to say one is easier or harder than the other. They're just different. So forgive me for the non-committed answer and sort of the trick question, but it's true. Which one's more challenging? I'd have to say it's a dead heat. Both are horrific. That good and bad vacillation can mean the narcissistic relationships get a lot more confusing. The fear and the menace means that the psychopathic relationships are more scary. So people get stuck for somewhat different reasons, and the thought process that's happening in the relationship can be quite different. That's, like I said, both groups get stuck, but the experience is different. Getting out feels different, and the outcomes can be quite different too. Hope that clarifies it. Thanks again.